Hello everybody, welcome back as ever to various Oddities Showcase, where I show off all the stuff that I've been tinkering with recently, that I can actually show on camera, for the most part. A lot of it's back-end stuff that's not necessarily even the least bit interpretable to the audience, and I'm still working on a lot of that, but that said, I'm trying to get things fixed up in a way that's nice and pretty, and also potentially get sort of a few outstanding bugs that are in the bug reporter on Curse. So, still working on getting the rooms to be more efficient so that when they're actually calculated, it doesn't lag out the entire game, because there could be quite a few of these, like, top of my head, say half a dozen per person that finishes the Witch Pact, so if it lags out the server every single time that one of them actually recalculates, that's not going to be good for everybody. But that said, the hives have had a little bit of a visual upgrade. And oh yes, also particles and various oddities now actually obey your particles setting in your like settings. So if you set this to minimal, then you actually won't see nearly much any of these particles. But yeah, if you have them on all, as I usually do, looks pretty nice. So the change that we've had here is that the block state for these things has gotten even more complex. The creep is possibly the most complicated block state object ever made, I want to say. I'm not gonna clarify that, but just maybe. So if they are a sufficient distance above the ground, then they will actually turn into this leafy texture, as well as if they don't have a down texture, a downside, which is these kind of sides here. See them over here as well. If they don't have one of those, they turn to leaves. And that basically is then randomly selected based on their horizontal coordinates, their x and their z coordinates. So consequently, we end up with this nice little kind of like tree effect. It's looking a lot more like a forest in here. And I figured it would just be a little bit too dull if it was just grass, if it was just leaves. So we also have these particles coming out of such blocks, which then drift around lazily and make the place look just a little bit more alive. Another thing we've had recently is that we have actually gotten the rooms here. We have storages as well as hatcheries, actually laying down blocks that will be important to their function. And that is dependent upon the presence of actual changelings, all of whom are currently outside. And the nests that we see here in the hatchery require a 3x3 space where there is no other nests, so consequently you can always move through them, even if they are ultimately blocked off by a present egg, for instance. And then over in the storages, we have these pods, or pots, I'm kind of going back and forth on what to call them, that are only aligned alongside the outer edges. So consequently, if there's an edge, be it along the outer circumference or just also inside, if it has one of these wall textures on it, then it is sufficient for a pod to be placed there. And the changelings will randomly pick up items around them, more likely if you're not watching, and they will bring them over to one of these, and they'll store them in here where they'll just sort of like bob about. And these will be used by the changelings in the forthcoming ritual room to potentially increase the size of their hive, thereby allowing it to spread even further and do all manner of extra things. And how they come by these items currently is just items on the ground, but they will be getting them from a variety of other sources. So there's that to look forward to. That's the bulk of what's been going on with the changelings so far, or at least the last couple of weeks. And I'm also making a big push for a significant GUI overhaul. So for instance, previously, if you were in survival mode, then you could open up your inventory and your challenge rating estimate would be placed above that. Now, I've had some reports that causes some trouble with things like NEI and JEI. You can't really use the search bar for some reason with that. And also, it was kind of limited. It was just a number. It didn't really tell anybody exactly what it meant or how it was calculated, that kind of thing. So, now there is a button up here. If you go to your client-side config, you can also change around where this is. If you do, for instance, have another mod that puts something here, you can change the config around to move it. And if we hit it, it takes us to this lovely screen. And this screen will show all of your armor, as well as whatever's in your main hand and in your offhand. It will also show all of your baubles, and it will give you buttons for all of your hotbar items, or just in this case, the one, which is the first one that is empty. And that will allow you to change around your selected item and change around, consequently, how many values are actually in play here. And it gives us a little bit of an idea of how things are calculated. So you've got your health, you've got your armor value, here is a approximation of your damage per second, so that takes into account the attack damage of what you have in your main hand, and just in general from things like strength, as well as the attack speed, which by default, so just for a random block of stone, is an attack speed of 4, whereas a sword is 1.6. I was quite surprised to find out that, in fact, a lump of dirt is faster to hit with than a sword, but there you go. And that will add up to a value which is then calculated to create your challenge rating, versus a fully geared player inside of iron armor with an iron sword. That's the comparison point that is considered to be challenge rating 1. And we also have your caster level displayed here. In this case, it is 20 because it's currently -1, which means I can cast anything, so it just decides it's 20. But that would be otherwise things like 0. Generally speaking, it will probably be just reading as 20 because there's currently no means of actually increasing your caster level, but we might see that in the very near future. Who knows? But this is a live feed, so if you change around your selected item by clicking on the buttons that show up down here, you can in fact change around what it says. So, yeah, there we are, showing up. And I can just select whatever item I like from my hotbar. It will change it around there, and it's just a matter then of what gear you're carrying and all sorts. So if I was to be carrying a sword of some description, and let's also grab an axe, why not? Make it a stone axe. Then I can, in fact, change around what that value says, and that helps you to know exactly, like, what you're dealing with here. So that helps you to know exactly what kind of power level you're dealing with, more or less, at least as far as the game is capable of calculating. And that can be useful potentially for if you wanted to have a nice friendly sparring match with another player. You can say that you are limiting yourselves to a certain challenge rating based on your equipment, and then you can just play around to that. Fun stuff. Does also take into account any status effects that you have, so I can in fact cast strength upon myself, and it will happily include that as well. Pretty nice, pretty nice. But that's not the only GUI that's getting an overhaul. I'm still working on the pact system. That's been the bulk of the thing that I've been working on for the past, couple of days. It's still very nascent. I can't really show it off at the moment. But another thing that's on the list to get tweaked is the way that inscribing is done. So currently, if you haven't tested out the inscribing for yourself just yet, you need a piece of paper at minimum, as well as at least one kind of enchanter of inscriber's ink. Well, let's go blue, why not? It's my favorite. And if you just right-click on that in the field, you can actually create yourselves some new spells just by changing around here. But it's very simple, and it's very dull, to say the least, and it definitely kind of rewards brute force, for lack of a better phrase. So if I was to sit here and just constantly go through here, picking up the different combinations, then I could find any manner of spells. I could find a level 1 spell, I could find a level 9 spell, which is the absolute top tier. There was a slight limit put on that in more recent versions, which is that you can only craft up to a certain configurable level with your hands, just like with paper wherever you are. You do need some actual items to do it, and an inscribing table then also has another limit that is increased by having certain mystic creatures around. The most popular one currently is the Marimo, which is a small little moss ball that if it glows, then it's a mystic version and you can use that. But those have like a battery that recharges and that kind of thing. But overall, it is just basically just going through and trying to figure out what all of these are, and it's not very interesting in the slightest. So to change that, I will be very heavily revising that. I'm hoping to try and get it to a system where it's sufficiently complex that it's interesting to figure out, but which brute force is not quite as effective. So essentially, I'm looking for, if you know how it works, you can figure out how to get the spell that you're looking for, but just going through all of the possible combinations won't necessarily get it, which also means that you won't necessarily get things by sheer accident. So it means that day one of a server, for instance, somebody's not going to end up with a level 9 spell, quite probably. The system that I'm currently taking as heavy inspiration for that is going to be the Guild Wars 2 Discovery system. So if you have a fire-type spell, then you can have that in your inventory whilst you're inscribing, and it will help you craft more fire-type spells, that kind of thing. So that will then mean that there's a little bit of a actual, like, progress to go through in order to get to whatever you're looking for. And it will also still retain the level limiting that we have in place currently to prevent people from just grinding out a whole ton of high-level spells at once, that kind of thing. But yeah, I'll show you some more progress on that in the next video, but for right now, enjoy the wonderful day inside of our little hive. Catch you next time, everybody. This video brought to you by my wonderful patrons at patreon.com/lying.